Blizzards sweeping down from the Arctic have brought much of Britain to a standstill, leaving motorists stranded, trains cancelled, 500,000 people without electricity and some without water too. Worst affected are the northeast, the Midlands and parts of Wales. Shropshire is totally cut off. Drifting snow has trapped hundreds of motorists on major and minor roads. The M1, M6 and M11 are completely blocked in places. So too are the M5, M62 and A66, while most Transpennine roads are impassable. British Rail is advising passengers not to travel tonight. London to Glasgow trains are ending their journey at Crewe. Passengers to Sheffield and Newcastle face indefinite delays. Rough seas have hit ferry services. Electricity supplies have been cut to hundreds of thousands of homes and to some pumping stations too, cutting off water supplies to parts of the West Country, North Oxfordshire and Shropshire, which is heading for a second night without power. The city of Wolverhampton could lose its supplies later tonight. Both the East Midlands and Birmingham airports are closed. Flights to and from Heathrow and Gatwick are as yet unaffected.
Arctic blizzards have paralysed much of the country. Near zero visibility and drifting snow have caused chaos for drivers. In the West Midlands, hundreds of people remain stranded on the M6. Cars and lorries have been abandoned in every lane, and people are preparing to spend the night in their vehicles. Drivers have reported seeing central reservation barriers ripped up by motorists desperate to return home. The police are clearing the motorway, but the freezing conditions mean they're making slow progress. Further north on the M6 in Cumbria, the last convoy of cars managed to get through at Chap this morning before the motorway was closed in both directions. One person died and another was seriously injured in road accidents in the county. Thousands of drivers have been forced to abandon journeys, and the treacherous conditions got the better of some motorists. It was a similar picture on the M62. The motorway was blocked for a time in both directions by an 18-car pileup. 4 people were injured, none of them seriously. In Humberside, winds gusting up to 60 miles an hour have brought down telephone and power lines, and there's been similar disruption throughout much of the country. The sporting programme was badly affected, with over half the league and cup matches postponed in England, and 3 out of the 4 race meetings cancelled. Birmingham, like many other city centres, may be looking seasonal enough, but the appalling weather meant there were few people around to enjoy the scenery. Christmas shopping trips were abandoned and stores closed early. Bus and train services were cancelled. Many people have faced a difficult struggle home. And even those best prepared for the snow have had some difficulties, as Britain got its first taste of the winter ahead.
The National Grid has set up an emergency centre in London to coordinate electricity supplies across the country. The weather forecasters say the blizzard conditions are set to continue, and the police are warning people not to travel unless it's absolutely essential.
The National Grid's hastily set up emergency centre has been inundated with calls as power cuts spread right across the country. Amongst the worst hit is Shropshire, cut off by road and with thousands of people facing a second night without electricity and water supplies. There have also been blackouts in Lancashire, Oxfordshire and parts of Wales.
It's very severe, very atrocious weather, some of the worst conditions that we've ever had to deal with on the National Grid system. In fact, we've actually had more than 500 individual problems on the system to deal with, and since the early hours we've had people mobilised, dealing with and coping with the problems that have been flung at us.
Weathermen had predicted the snap cold spell, caused, they say, by a low-pressure front coming in from the Arctic, and they warn there are more blizzards on their way.
I think it's going to go on for several days to come, not necessarily in this degree of severity, and perhaps the heavier snow will be in different places, but we've got a very cold blast of air to come for several days, perhaps into the middle of next week.
With no let-up in store and conditions remaining treacherous, the emergency services have repeated their advice to people to stay inside, wrap up warm and not venture out unless it's absolutely necessary.